Now, there have been serious calls for the New South Wales and the federal government to inject more stimulus into the economy. And this would complement the Reserve Bank's interest rate cuts that have already taken effect over the past few months. The RBA governor, however, he did say last week that there were signs the economy was lifting and that it would return to a growth trend next year. He also said that the housing market is looking like it's picking up. I discussed this and more with the New South Wales Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, and I get a few tips from him on how much sleep he's getting with a newborn bub. He's just had number 6. I don't know how he does that job as well, a dad of 5, including a newborn, as well as being Treasurer. Have a listen to the interview. New South Wales Treasurer, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Sherry.
Now, the IMF, RBA, Labor and industry groups have all argued in recent months for more stimulus to be injected into the economy, although the RBA's outlook for next year has improved slightly. Do you think more stimulus is needed, or do you think the economy is going to return to trend next year?
Well, that's what our projections are, but we're obviously focused, particularly at a state level, on the supply side and making sure that we cut red tape and continue to build infrastructure to drive economic growth at our end. I think if you look at the IMF and the World Bank, they're also saying the most important things that sub-sovereign jurisdictions particularly can be driving right now to help stimulate the economy is building more infrastructure. And we've got a significant pipeline of projects, $90 billion over the next 4 years, and that's adding about 0.5 percentage point to our economic growth each year. So we believe that will hopefully, as things are slowing, that will continue to hold up the New South Wales economy and also help drive economic growth right across the country.
Do you accept, as some leading economists have suggested, and even the former RBA governor, that monetary policy and emergency low interest rates aren't having the stimulatory effect on the economy that they once did?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think that I believe those cuts have certainly helped somewhat. I think there was obviously projections that they would probably do a bit more, but it's early days, and I think we should just wait and see. I think we're seeing particularly certain areas of the New South Wales economy picking up, the property market's beginning to pick up, and hopefully we will see a wages growth at the same time over the next couple of years improve as well, and that will hopefully help drive the economy going forward.
What about concerns about a debt bubble being created?
Well, the debt position here in New South Wales, I mean, the cost of debt's very, very cheap at the moment. And if you look at our debt position here in New South Wales, we've got a negative net debt position, but that goes to around $38 billion over the next 4 years. But as a percentage of GSP, that's about half some of the other states, whilst building double the infrastructure. So we're in a pretty good position right now where I think our debt position here, and particularly probably in other jurisdictions as well, is affordable and sustainable going into the future. And there are pressures, obviously, as we continue to build that infrastructure. There are always pressures on budgets as we're seeing declining revenues as well. But I'm pretty confident that the debt position, particularly here and probably some of the other state jurisdictions, is in a very good place.
It's very hard at the moment for people to get loans, whether it's for a mortgage or to grow their business or even to renovate and other personal loans. Do you think the fact that the lending money criteria has tightened partly in the wake of the Royal Commission is putting a handbrake on our economy?
Look, I mean, that's ultimately a matter for the banks and for APRA in terms of lending. And I think, obviously there's been some concerns at APRA's level, particularly in relation to, the housing market increase over time, concerns in relation to slow wage growth and the credit risks off the back of that. And at the same time, as you quite rightly say, in terms of the Banking Royal Commission, that's probably also led to some more conservative positions from banks when it comes to lending. However, I think we're probably seeing that pick up. So it's really a matter for them to get the balance right. It's interesting, though, before the Royal Commission, there's concerns about too much lending. Now there's concerns about there not being enough. But I think we're probably getting a bit more back to where that balance should be. And particularly now where we're seeing the property market, I think in terms of lending back in New South Wales, we're seeing some of that financing improve as the auction clearance rates pick up.
Well, you've just mentioned the property market improving a couple of times now. Are we likely to see, therefore, an improvement in the budget position when you hand down your half-yearly report in December?
Well, look, we've written down a significant amount of stamp duty, around $10 billion, given the softening in the property market. And obviously, it's a substantial contributor to our state revenues. But look, I don't want to make any projections yet in relation to the half-yearly review, but we are seeing, I think, the property market pick up. But even though we're getting closer back to that 80% clearance rate, the stock is still pretty low, well below average. So.
Is it picking up because people are feeling more confident with the state of the economy, or what do you think the reason is?
Well, I mean, I think it was always going to be, it was overheated for some time, so I think there was always going to be a correction, and that's what's occurred. I think post the elections of both the state and the federal elections, I think probably there was a lot more conservatism out there in the market. But I think that we could call it the coalition confidence off the back of those two elections. Concerns around, particularly in relation to some of the Labor Party policies, has probably led to some, I guess, concern in relation to investment. But we're seeing that pick up, and usually when you get the auction clearance rates back to where they are, we should see an increase in the stock coming off the back of that. But at the same time, in terms of budget pressures, we've still seen significant reductions in GST as well. In the last federal budget, the pool was reduced, and we had our revenues reduced on GST down by about $2.3 billion. So there are significant pressures, not just on the federal budget, but on state budgets as well, particularly, I think, if you look at Victoria and New South Wales, not just on stamp duties, but also on GST with consumption softening.
Look, while we're still on the property market, you're considering a couple of proposals at the moment, including one that came out of the Productivity Commission review to replace stamp duty with a land tax. Do you think a proposal like, and I understand you haven't made a decision on that, but do you think a proposal like this would give the economy a boost?
Well, what's important from my perspective as the State Treasurer in New South Wales is that we lower taxes, and we've cut taxes, $5 billion worth of taxes over the last 4 budgets, and we want our tax system here to be low, but at the same time efficient. And the reality is, when it comes to state taxes, we rely on many inefficient taxes and also particularly volatile taxes. So when you're writing down substantial amounts of stamp duty, it can be very hard sometimes to plan for future service delivery in those circumstances. So the work that we have released in relation to the Productivity Commission's report, and then this week the Federal Financial Relations, talks to some of the inefficiencies of the tax system that we have here that states rely upon. And I think it's important that we have a discussion. We haven't set out and said that we want solutions to what a future tax system should look like. But what we do want to have is, I guess, input from the public in terms of what are some of the solutions that we could look at. Every economist you will meet, Shari, will say that the most efficient tax is a land tax, and that we should replace stamp duty. But I've never seen a way in which a solution to how that could work, both financially or politically. But I think as a country, we need to be mature enough when we know these global headwinds are coming our way to make sure that we look at opportunities to work across the political divide to reform our tax system in a way that will help grow the economy and improve productivity.
Well, how much more revenue would come in if you did ultimately replace stamp duty with a land tax?
Well, obviously, if you were to do something like that in the short term, you'd have a significant reduction in your revenue, and that's why it's a very challenging reform to look at. We haven't got a policy on that front. What we are saying is that if you look at every Productivity Commission report, both the one that we've released at a state level, the one that Josh Frydenberg has released at a federal level, the work their Productivity Commission has done, has spoken to some of the challenges around the tax system here in our jurisdictions, and we should be looking at solutions to how we can improve them to make sure we have.
Have you seen any projections, maybe in the medium or long term, for New South Wales on how much more revenue, how much more tax you would be getting in?
We would lose. We would lose by that transition. You would lose.
Isn't that just in the short term, though? ultimately
Yeah,
it would
in
be
a short term and ultimately over a 30 or 40-year period, you would see those revenues pick up. But what's more important is moving towards a system where states are able to project their revenues into the future without relying on volatile taxes, and importantly, improving the system between Commonwealth and state relations. We have around 50 different financial arrangements with the Commonwealth, and 25 of those provide less than $5 million. So the significant bureaucracy behind the administration of all these arrangements certainly, I believe, is not the best way that our federation can operate. And
But politically, it would be almost impossible, wouldn't it? Or it would be very difficult to try convince the public who've already paid stamp duty if they've bought a place to have to swap to land tax.
You could never do anything, and you should certainly not do that. We believe in lower taxes. You don't want a system where there's double taxation. This is about making sure that by releasing these papers that we get input from the community about how we can improve the federal financial relations into the future. You certainly wouldn't ever provide a system, in my view, where people have paid tax and have to pay it again. We believe in lower taxes. We just think that there should be a mature discussion between the states and the Commonwealth in relation to what's the best tax mix.
So there might be something like a transition period, but it would be one proposal that I think the Productivity Commission might have suggested.
Yeah, and if that's something that you could certainly look at, and we're open to all suggestions in relation to this. You know, whether it's New South Wales Treasury working with the Commonwealth Treasury on what's some models that could work, whether it's in stamp duty, reducing stamp duty, and that's what we've done particularly for first home buyers because we know that can help them get into the market, and we've seen them storm back in here in New South Wales. We've also indexed the stamp duty brackets for the first time in decades to reduce that tax burden well into the future because we know that stamp duty is an impediment to transfer, it's an impediment to growth, and we want to have a system that drives better economic outcomes for the state, and ultimately that improves national growth off the back of it. So we're in the early stages here. What we don't want to see, and you can get frustrated when issues get ruled out. I mean, progress was never made by taking ideas off the table. And if you're doing what is right, that should be above politics. And I think what we need to have right now is a conversation across the political divide, across the jurisdictional divide, about how can we improve the system for the better to help not just, I guess, not just simply be focused on the next election, but to be focused on the next generation and setting our country up for future prosperity.
New South Wales Treasurer, just a couple of other things before you go. Firstly, is the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, moving to Canberra? Has he indicated that to you?
No, I don't think so. I think he's completely committed to his role here as Deputy Premier in New South Wales. He's a strong advocate for regional issues. He's forever on the case for further investment in the regions, and I think we've certainly seen that. I think he's been a successful Deputy Premier and leader of the National Party here in New South Wales, and I think when you've got a strong connection between, and obviously that provides public friction at times, I think there's a healthy tension at the moment between both the Liberal and National Party here in New South Wales, and you know, he keeps us on our toes, and I think he's making a great contribution and will continue to do so into the future.
You went to the Everest on the weekend. What did you make of the ABC report into the deaths of racehorses?
Well, obviously that was very concerning, and I think you've seen the head of Racing Australia, the former Premier here in New South Wales, Barrow Farrell, and the head of Racing New South Wales, Peter V'landys, come out and say they were appalled by that report. But importantly, here in our state, all of our former racehorses are rehomed, and we've got and there's very strong regulations and good practice in place here. So obviously those things are concerning. But what's most important here in our state is that we have a very strong industry, and obviously I think the weekend at the Everest was another great day for racing in New South Wales as we end up becoming the premier race day and taking over the Melbourne Cup.
Treasurer, I also saw you took your new baby, 6-week-old little Beatrice, to the races on the weekend. Your 6th child. What tips do you have for me on how you get sleep while being Treasurer?
Well, she didn't pick any winners, unfortunately, for me, but it was good in her early days to be at the track, and she enjoyed the day. Look, you know, when you have 6 kids, you benefit from economies of scale. So it gets easier over time as the older kids help out. So look, it keeps you alive. It gives you a great perspective on. You know, on life, and obviously having children is the most wonderful things you can have. So I probably get a bit more sleep than my wife, but you know, like any father, like any mother, balancing work and family life, it's a challenge, but very rewarding at the same time.
And that was the New South Wales Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet.